Good morning, Mr Mayor. Good morning, Commissioner. So my question is for the Commissioner. In October, when you first appeared in front of the Police and Crime Committee, we spoke about diversion as opposed to criminalisation for the possession of cannabis. And one of the things you said you did in your time in Surrey back in 2011 was, and I quote, to be one of the driving forces nationally in building a different approach with out-of-court disposals. And you described how that eventually became community resolutions. So it's clear that you see the benefits of diversion for people who are stopped with cannabis. Now, I understand the Met needs to implement an out-of-court disposal framework by April 2023, which is just 4 months away. So what stage has the Met reached with preparations for implementing a framework for out-of-court disposals? And can you tell me what benefits you anticipate?
I'll get the hang of it eventually. So this is very, very timely. I think nationally people are working hard to get to this new date for out-of-court disposal, the new regime that government has legislated for. Whether that ends up being the final start date or whether it moves, I'm not sure. We have an advanced business case. The challenge is that previously out-of-court disposals were it wasn't always required to have the strongest sort of intervention as the alternative. Some of them were done quite informally. The new legislation requires quite a high level of formal intervention from various providers. And so we've been looking at how that is coordinated and provided for. And there are two challenges there. One is the coordination of that. So if you say, well, you're not going to be prosecuted as long as, there's some coordination and follow-up to make sure that is followed through. There's also the commissioning of those organisations that deliver the as long as intervention, which may be it may be to do with drugs, it may be to do with restorative justice. There's a whole range of things, or it may be some sort of training or education thing, and that is quite a costly framework. And we've been discussing with MOPAC the commissioning of those services, and that sort of conversation is going on across the country. So I'm keen on doing this. The current legislation raises the cost and complexity of out-of-court disposals quite significantly, and that's what we're wrestling with.
Thank you. Now, yesterday, the Centre for Justice Innovation launched a briefing on best practice for pre-court disposals for possession of drugs. And they recommend that the police do not use existing statutory out-of-court disposal, nor either of the two new statutory out-of-court disposals. In their view, there's a problem with the requirement for admission of guilt and the criminal record consequences. So just to be clear, with the community diversion that you're planning for London, will it be referring people to local drug support services without a formal admission of guilt? And will you record these cases as community resolution or no further action?
I can't answer that question in detail. We can write to you afterwards.
Thank you. I'd very much appreciate that. Just to follow up just a bit further on that, are you confident that you're going to be able to make it different for the people who are stopped? At the moment, if the Met has a Section 60 in place for weapons, you'll probably also pull in lots of people on cannabis possession. So what's going to change with out-of-court disposals for the people who are stopped and searched? So in terms of disposal, there are already out-of-court disposals, I think, for a lot of the cannabis stops. I think what changes with the new arrangements as and when they arrive is more formal intervention to follow, as I was saying earlier. That's the key. That's the key point. Rather than it just being a warning, I think there has to be formal follow-up. Okay, thank you. Now, last week at Health Committee, the MOPAC Director of Commissioning and Partnership told me about a new London Drugs Forum, which is jointly chaired by the Deputy Mayor for Police and Crime and the Mayoral Health Advisor. So I welcome this as a way to bring together all the relevant people to be looking at drug-related harm in that sort of big picture way. So you've got the boroughs, MOPAC, the public health teams all on board with you. Do you think it'll be a challenge to get all the frontline officers to buy into the benefits of diversion when they're used to an enforcement approach?
I don't think I don't think that change in policy will be a problem for frontline officers as long as that is practical. And that's one of the points I was making earlier. If there has to be a follow-through on every case in terms of has this person done what was required, I think expecting every officer in the Met to keep a tag on offenders, we effectively become an offender management service. And that's a concern for me, which is one of the things we're looking at in the arrangements. How do we manage that? As I say, the new legislative requirements have lifted the specification and cost of doing out-of-court disposals, and that's what we're working through with City Hall. But I mean, out-of-court disposals, in my mind, are more important than ever. The backlogs in the criminal justice system in London are eye-watering and are causing major problems. And so any case that can be dealt with effectively without adding to that throughput through the justice system, it must be a sensible thing to do.
Thank you. Mr Mayor, very briefly, it's good to see your London Drug Commission website is published along with the list of commissioners. I've been nudging you about that for a while. There's a tantalising message on the page about a consultation. Can you tell me briefly when that's going to begin?
I think the word used by civil servants is shortly.
Thank you very much. I'll look forward to that. Okay, so I now want to talk about strip search and disproportionality. And again, my question is for the Commissioner. I recently got an answer to a Mayor's question about strip search in Met custody suites that shows that since 2017-18, 1 in 5, 20% of people who go into a custody suite are strip searched. To me, this seems like a very high number for what is one of the most intrusive powers that the police have. Would you agree with that?
I'm not sure about that data point now. As a result of the Child Q case, there's been a big piece of review work in terms of the amount of strip searching going on, and the numbers have pretty much halved, both for adults and for children data. And I can't drag them to the front of my mind, but they have reduced very, very significantly.
Okay. Now, the data also showed me that black people are being strip searched more than anyone else. A quarter of all the black people who entered custody suites in those 5 years to March 2022 were strip searched. That was almost 50,000 strip searches, whereas it was only 17% of white people. So this seems like another area where there has been and potentially still is a disproportionality problem. So what are you doing to address the continuing disproportionality in the use of strip search?
So I think there are risks with plucking one number out of the air and not looking at a sort of proper analysis. Our Insight unit have done some analysis, and the disproportionality, when you look at the offences people are arrested for and the circumstances, I think a large part, if not all, the disproportionality goes away. So I think we need to look at the context that these things take place in, not simply pick headline numbers.
No, I totally get your point about the problems with pulling these big numbers out, but it is impacting on trust and confidence amongst Londoners. I was talking to young people at London Youth last night. The only young people in the room who knew someone who had been stopped and searched were young black people. So it is a problem, and it does relate to trust and confidence. So I think it is important that we look into this. The other thing that the data showed was that there are big variations in the use of strip search between different custody suites. For example, a third of all people who entered the custody suite in Shoreditch are strip searched, whereas in places like Heathrow and Colindale, it's about 12%. So having this level of disparity in the possibility of experiencing one of the most intrusive powers that the police have based on where you happen to be in London feels like it's a problem. Are you focusing your efforts on reducing the use of strip search in those suites where it is used far more often?
So one of the reasons we've seen a reduction is looking across the Met and improving practice everywhere. I think your point about trust is important, but I think there's also something about how we look at the crime problems that policing is wrestling with. I've been really clear that we have some officers in the service who are racist, who we need to sort out, and we don't get everything right. I've been really candid about that. But I think it would be helpful if in the conversations we have in fora like this, we also look at how crime falls very unevenly on London. I very rarely get questions publicly about why is it that young black men are 12 times more likely to be murdered in London over the last decade than young white men. So we're always focusing on the police use of powers, and I'm absolutely clear we haven't always got that right, so I'm not trying to be defensive about it. But if we're to tackle the fact that black communities have the lowest trust but also the highest victimisation, we need to be prepared to talk about these issues in the round. And I'm sort of asking you to think about whether we can have that more rounded conversation where we think about that victimisation. It really strikes me that during COVID, we got really exercised as a country when there were some signs of disproportionality of 2- or 3-fold for some groups in terms of impact of COVID. Here we are, a decade of data that says 12 times more likely if you're a young black man, and we almost never talk about it. Why is that?
Mm-hmm. Well, that's a conversation we need to continue to have. My final question is about the use of strip search on children. Now, over the past 5 years, 8,000 or 7,935 young people have been strip searched in custody. Now, I spoke with Hackney Account a couple of months ago, and they told me about accompanying a sibling to a police station and how violated and vulnerable their sibling felt after being strip searched. And this is at the hands of the adults that are supposed to be protecting these young people. So given that children are traumatised by strip search, even when safeguards are in place and even when protocol is followed, will you end the use of strip search on children?
So again, you're asking a question which is one part of the picture. I've been really clear, we overused and misused strip search on children, and we're tackling that, and that's why it's reduced. But in the last year, we've had over 500 children stabbed in London, mostly by the children. We've had, I think, 11, on average, we've had 11 die. You know that we're investigating a case at the moment where 2, I think, 16-year-olds were murdered in Greenwich, and we've arrested several other children the same age. So there's something in the narrative which is saying, well, because they're children, you shouldn't be using any intrusive powers. Likewise, over the last year, we've arrested 1,300 children for drug supply. This is really difficult stuff. And of course, some of these children are victims and have been groomed. Some of them are dangerous offenders. Some have progressed from one area to the other. And if we're to have a proper, frank conversation about the police use of really sensitive powers on children who are ranged from being damaged to being dangerous, then we need to look at this in the round. So I'm not pretending we've always got it right, but I want in these sort of fora to have a proper, serious conversation on the roundness of the issue, the challenging operational situation we face, and whether police are getting tactics right or wrong. I'm up for that, rather than just picking one part of the agenda.
OK, that's absolutely fair enough, but we do need to think about the experience of young black people, possibly with autism, who are who just get into bad interactions with some police officers, and we do need to think about that disproportionality. So I'm glad we agree on that.
I completely agree. We haven't always got it right. We haven't as often as we could have done got appropriate adults present. There are things that we could have done better in the use of these tactics. I'm completely frank about that. But when people are hiding weapons and or drugs in intimate places, a more than cursory search is required, and that's the wicked problem that we're dealing with in terms of dealing with children who are sadly involved in such serious crime.
Thank you. I've got no further questions.
Thank you.